The parts of ourselves that we try to hide, deny, or ignore are always there waiting for moments to emerge. Sometimes they show up as anger that feels uncontrollable, envy that makes us ashamed, or fear that paralyzes us when we least expect it. These experiences aren't random. They are the undeniable signals of what Carl Jung called the shadow, the hidden aspects of our psyche that we repress because we've been taught they are unacceptable. No one escapes the shadow. It is a part of being human. Yet most of us live as if we can outrun it. We try to suppress it, rationalize it, or pretend it doesn't exist. But the truth is, ignoring the shadow only gives it more power. What you refuse to confront doesn't dissipate, it grows in the dark, shaping your thoughts, decisions, and relationships without your awareness. It is not something external, it is within you, and its influence can sabotage your future in ways you cannot control until you face it. Jung's concept of the shadow is not just a psychological theory. It is a reality that governs the way we live. It represents the parts of ourselves we have disowned, the emotions and impulses we've labeled as undesirable. These could be anger, fear, jealousy, or even traits like ambition, creativity, or boldness, qualities we might have repressed because they didn't fit into the image of who we thought we were supposed to be. Over time, this repression creates a split in our psyche. On one side, there's the version of ourselves we show to the world, the polished, acceptable persona. On the other side, there's the shadow, containing everything we've rejected. This split causes an underlying tension, a conflict that doesn't go away on its own. We might not notice it at first, but it shows up in the moments when we feel out of control, when we act in ways that surprise even ourselves.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
The shadow doesn't disappear just because we refuse to look at it. Instead, it festers and finds other ways to make itself known. One of the most common ways the shadow manifests is through projection. When we repress parts of ourselves, we don't actually get rid of them, we just push them out of conscious awareness. But these traits still exist, and because we refuse to see them in ourselves, we begin to see them in others. For example, someone who has suppressed their own anger might constantly accuse others of being hostile. Someone who has buried their ambition might resent others for being too competitive. Projection allows us to avoid facing our own shadow by attributing its contents to the people around us. This defense mechanism might protect our self-image in the short term, but it distorts our perception of reality and creates unnecessary conflict in our relationships. The more disconnected we are from our shadow, the more likely we are to fall into patterns of projection. We blame others for the things we don't want to acknowledge in ourselves, and this creates a cycle of misunderstanding and resentment. Relationships suffer because we're not engaging with people as they truly are. We're engaging with the parts of ourselves we've projected onto them. This can lead to feelings of isolation, as the very traits we refuse to confront in ourselves become the barriers that separate us from others. But projection is not the only way the shadow sabotages us. It also shows up in patterns of self-sabotage. When we repress parts of ourselves, we create a sense of incompleteness. This disconnection from our whole self can lead to feelings of inadequacy, self-doubt, and fear. We might find ourselves stuck in cycles of procrastination, avoiding challenges, or settling for less than we're capable of. These behaviors often stem from the parts of ourselves we've rejected. For instance, someone who has repressed their own desire for success might unconsciously sabotage their career opportunities because deep down they believe they don't deserve to succeed. The shadow doesn't just contain the traits we dislike, it also contains our untapped potential. The qualities we've suppressed are often the same qualities we need to achieve our goals and live fulfilling lives. But because we've labeled these traits as unacceptable, we cut ourselves off from them. This creates an internal conflict where part of us wants to move forward, but another part holds us back. The result is a feeling of being stuck, as if we're constantly working against ourselves. The shadow's influence extends beyond our personal lives. It also affects the way we interact with the world. When we refuse to acknowledge our shadow, we become more susceptible to external influences. We might find ourselves drawn to groups, ideologies, or leaders that reflect the parts of ourselves we've disowned. This is why Jung warned about the dangers of collective shadow projection. When individuals fail to confront their own shadows, they project them onto others, creating divisions and conflicts on a larger scale. History is filled with examples of this dynamic, from political scapegoating to cultural prejudice. The shadow, when ignored, doesn't just harm individuals, it can tear societies apart. But the shadow is not inherently negative. It is simply the part of ourselves we have yet to integrate. It contains not only the traits we've labeled as bad, but also the traits we've neglected or misunderstood. For example, someone who has repressed their own assertiveness might find that their shadow contains the courage and confidence they need to stand up for themselves. Someone who has buried their creativity might discover that their shadow holds the key to their greatest artistic expression. The shadow is not an enemy to be defeated, it is a part of ourselves that needs to be understood and integrated. Integration doesn't mean acting on every impulse or indulging in every desire. It means acknowledging the shadow's existence and finding constructive ways to express its contents. This process requires honesty and self-awareness. It means looking at the parts of ourselves we've avoided and asking why we've avoided them. It means questioning the beliefs and values that led us to label certain traits as unacceptable. It means recognizing that the shadow is not something to fear, but something to learn from. The process of integrating the shadow is not easy. It requires confronting the parts of ourselves we'd rather ignore, and this can be uncomfortable. But the discomfort is worth it, because the alternative is living a life controlled by forces we don't understand. When we deny the shadow, we give it power over us. When we integrate it, we reclaim that power. We become more whole, more authentic, and more capable of navigating life's challenges. We begin to see ourselves and others more clearly, free from the distortions of projection. The shadow is not something that can be eliminated, nor should it be. It is an essential part of who we are, a source of insight and growth. Ignoring it only leads to more conflict and suffering, both within ourselves and in the world around us. Facing the shadow is not about fixing what is broken, it is about recognizing what has always been there and finding a way to live in harmony with it. The shadow is persistent. It does not allow itself to be ignored forever. The more you repress it, the more it begins to manifest in unexpected ways, often when you are least prepared to deal with it. This is why you might find yourself acting out of character at moments that matter most. Imagine being in an important conversation and suddenly feeling consumed by frustration or insecurity you can't explain. These reactions are not random. They are the shadow breaking through the barriers you've built to contain it. No matter how much effort you put into suppressing it, the shadow finds its way out. It might surface in your tone of voice, in a decision you make that feels irrational in hindsight, or in a pattern of behavior you repeat despite knowing it's harmful. The shadow does not negotiate with you, it demands acknowledgement. When ignored, it becomes a saboteur, but when recognized, it has the potential to become a teacher. To live in denial of the shadow is to live in denial of reality. It is to live with a distorted version of yourself that only reflects what you think others want to see. This disconnection creates an internal struggle that saps your energy and leaves you feeling divided. You might experience this as a vague sense of dissatisfaction, a feeling that something is missing, or an ongoing frustration with yourself that you can't quite articulate. These feelings are not signs that something is wrong with you, they are signals that you are out of alignment with your whole self. The longer you ignore these signals, the stronger they become. Eventually, the tension between the persona you present to the world and the shadow you suppress can lead to a kind of psychological breakdown. This is not a failure, it is an opportunity. When the shadow forces its way into your awareness, it is giving you a chance to confront what you have been avoiding. It is offering you the possibility of integration. Integration does not mean erasing the shadow or eliminating the parts of yourself you dislike. It means bringing them into the light of awareness and finding a way to live with them. This process requires courage because it involves facing truths about yourself that you might find uncomfortable or even painful. It requires letting go of the illusion that you are only the polished, acceptable version of yourself that you show to others. It means admitting that you are more complex than that you have qualities and impulses that don't fit neatly into the image you've created. This honesty can be difficult, but it is also liberating. When you stop trying to deny your shadow, you free up the energy you were using to keep it hidden. This energy can then be redirected toward growth, creativity, and meaningful change. One of the most profound shifts that occurs when you integrate your shadow is that you begin to take responsibility for your life. You stop blaming others for the things you don't like about yourself. You stop projecting your insecurities onto the people around you. You stop seeing the world as an adversary and start seeing it as a mirror. This shift can transform your relationships. When you stop projecting your shadow onto others, you begin to see them more clearly. You start to recognize that the traits you judged in them were often reflections of the parts of yourself you had not yet accepted. This realization can lead to greater empathy and understanding. You no longer feel the need to control or change others because you understand that the real work lies within you. This does not mean that you become passive or indifferent to the behavior of others. It means that your reactions are no longer driven by unconscious patterns. You can respond to situations with clarity and intention rather than being triggered by unresolved aspects of your shadow. As you integrate your shadow, you also begin to access the hidden potential it contains. The shadow is not just a repository for negative traits. It is also the source of your untapped strength, creativity, and passion. The qualities you've rejected are often the same qualities that hold the key to your growth. For example, someone who has repressed their assertiveness might discover that this trait, when expressed constructively, allows them to set boundaries and pursue their goals. Someone who has buried their emotions might find that embracing their vulnerability leads to deeper, more authentic connections with others. The process of integration is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming whole. It is about embracing all aspects of yourself, even the ones you find difficult to accept. This does not mean indulging in every impulse or acting on every desire. It means acknowledging these parts of yourself and finding constructive ways to express them. It means recognizing that your shadow is not an enemy to be defeated, but a part of yourself that can be understood and transformed. This transformation is not a one-time event, it is an ongoing process. The shadow is not static, it evolves as you do. As you grow and change, new aspects of your shadow may emerge. This is not a sign of failure, it is a sign that you are continuing to develop. Each time you confront a new aspect of your shadow, you have the opportunity to learn more about yourself and to integrate more fully. This process requires humility because it involves admitting that you don't have all the answers and that there is always more to learn. It requires patience because it takes time to unravel the layers of the shadow and to understand its messages. It requires commitment because the work of integration is never truly finished, but the rewards are worth it. As you integrate your shadow, you begin to experience a greater sense of inner peace. The tension between your persona and your shadow diminishes, and you feel more aligned with yourself. You no longer feel the need to hide parts of yourself or to pretend to be someone you're not. This authenticity allows you to connect more deeply with others and to live a life that feels more meaningful and fulfilling. You also become more resilient. When you have faced your shadow, you are less likely to be thrown off course by external challenges. You have a deeper understanding of yourself, which allows you to navigate difficult situations with greater clarity and confidence. You are no longer controlled by unconscious fears or insecurities because you have brought them into the light of awareness. This resilience is not about being invulnerable, it is about being open to the full range of human experience. It is about accepting that life is complex and that you are complex, and finding a way to live with that complexity. The shadow is not something to be feared or avoided, it is something to be embraced. It is a part of what makes you human, and it is a part of what makes you unique. Ignoring it only leads to more conflict and suffering, both within yourself and in your relationships. Facing it requires courage and honesty, but it also offers the possibility of transformation. By confronting your shadow, you can begin to live a life that feels more authentic, more whole, and more aligned with your true self. The shadow is not your enemy, it is your teacher, and the lessons it has to offer are some of the most valuable you will ever learn. The shadow doesn't just sit quietly in the background of your life, it actively seeks expression. If you've ever found yourself repeating patterns of behavior that you swore you would never repeat, or if you've ever reacted to someone or something in a way that seemed out of proportion, that's the shadow at work. It's not random and it's not meaningless. These moments are signals, showing you that there are parts of yourself you are unwilling to face. The more you avoid them, the more they show up. They don't ask for permission, they come through in the cracks, in the moments when your mask slips, when your carefully constructed persona falters, and when they do, the consequences are often painful. It might look like sabotaging a relationship because of jealousy you didn't want to admit, or missing an opportunity because fear disguised itself as logic. You tell yourself stories to explain these moments, but deep down you know the real reason. You know that something inside you is pulling the strings and you don't fully understand it. That something is your shadow. People often think of the shadow as purely negative, as if it's a collection of everything bad or wrong about them, but that's not the full picture. The shadow also contains suppressed strengths, potential, and desires that you've buried because they didn't fit into the image you were trying to create. Maybe you were taught that being assertive was rude, so you buried your ability to stand up for yourself. Maybe you were told that expressing your emotions made you weak, so you learned to suppress your feelings. Over time, these repressed parts of yourself became part of your shadow. They didn't go away. They turned inward, hidden but still alive, and they emerge in ways you don't always recognize, often disguised as the very things you dislike in others. Projection is one of the most common ways the shadow makes itself known. When you refuse to acknowledge certain qualities in yourself, you unconsciously project them onto the people around you. If you've repressed your own anger, you might see others as being unnecessarily hostile. If you've buried your ambition, you might resent others for being too competitive. This isn't about them, it's about you. The world becomes a mirror, reflecting back the parts of yourself you've tried to avoid. Projection distorts reality, creating conflict where there doesn't need to be conflict. It damages relationships because you're not truly engaging with the other person, you're engaging with your own unresolved issues. And until you recognize this pattern, it will keep repeating. The shadow is not content to remain hidden forever. It demands your attention, and if you refuse to give it willingly, it will find ways to force its way into your awareness. Sometimes this happens through emotional outbursts or irrational behavior. Other times it shows up as self-sabotage. You might procrastinate on a project that's important to you, not because you don't care about it, but because some part of you fears success or believes you're not worthy of it. You might stay in a toxic relationship, not because you don't see the red flags, but because some part of you feels you don't deserve better. These patterns aren't random, they are the shadow at work, influencing your decisions in ways you don't fully understand. But the shadow isn't just about the negative traits you've suppressed. It also contains the parts of you that hold the key to your growth, your creativity, your passion, your courage. All of these might be hidden in your shadow if you've been taught to see them as dangerous or unacceptable. For example, if you grew up in an environment where conformity was valued above all else, you might have suppressed your individuality. If you were told that pursuing your dreams was impractical, you might have buried your ambition. These parts of yourself didn't disappear, they became part of your shadow, and by ignoring them, you've cut yourself off from the resources you need to live a fulfilling life. Integrating the shadow doesn't mean acting on every impulse or indulging in every desire. It means acknowledging these parts of yourself and finding a way to express them constructively. It means recognizing that your anger, for example, isn't inherently bad. It's a signal that something needs to change. Your fear isn't something to be ashamed of. It's a sign that you care about something deeply. Your ambition isn't selfish. It's a reflection of your potential. When you stop fighting these parts of yourself and start understanding them, you can begin to use them in ways that serve you rather than sabotage you. This process is challenging because it requires honesty. It's not easy to admit that the traits you dislike in others are often the traits you've repressed in yourself. It's not easy to face the ways you've been sabotaging your own happiness or success. But without this honesty, nothing changes. You stay stuck in the same patterns, repeating the same mistakes, blaming the same external circumstances, all the while ignoring the root cause. The shadow doesn't disappear just because you want it to. It requires your attention, your willingness to look at what you've been avoiding. As you begin to integrate your shadow, you might notice that your relationships start to change. When you stop projecting your unresolved issues onto others, you can see them more clearly. You can engage with them as they are, rather than as reflections of your own fears and insecurities. This creates space for deeper, more authentic connections. You might also notice that you feel less reactive. The things that used to trigger you no longer have the same power because you've addressed the underlying issues within yourself. This doesn't mean you'll never get angry or frustrated. It means you'll be able to respond to situations with greater clarity and intention rather than being driven by unconscious patterns. Integrating the shadow also allows you to access the potential it contains. The qualities you've suppressed are often the ones you need most. When you embrace your assertiveness, you can set boundaries and pursue your goals with confidence. When you accept your vulnerability, you can connect with others on a deeper level. When you reclaim your creativity, you can find new ways to solve problems and express yourself. These are not things you need to acquire, they are already within you, waiting to be acknowledged. The process of integrating the shadow is not a one-time event. It's an ongoing process because the shadow evolves as you do. As you grow and change, new aspects of the shadow may emerge. But the result is a life that feels more authentic, more whole. You no longer feel the need to wear a mask or pretend to be someone you're not. You can show up as your true self, with all your strengths and imperfections. This authenticity allows you to connect with others in meaningful ways and to pursue goals that align with who you really are. The shadow is not something to be feared or fought against. It is a part of you and it has valuable lessons to offer. By facing it, you can begin to live a life that feels more aligned with your true self, free from the patterns of self-sabotage and projection that have held you back. This is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. It's about recognizing that every part of you, even the parts you've tried to hide, has a place in your life. The shadow is not your enemy. It is a guide showing you the parts of yourself you've been unwilling to see. And when you begin to see it, you begin to see yourself more clearly.